couple notes up front. I am a first-time mom, and this was a planned and wanted pregnancy. I am still trying to process the last 72 hours, which has caused me significant trauma and distress. I am writing this out publicly to warn other mothers. This happened in Texas. I am currently 9+1. I have been in the emergency room a couple times for severe 24/7 nausea, which is triggering significant panic attacks. The nausea is the worst at night, and which has been keeping me from sleeping, which makes minchets and anxiety worse. Plus, I'm unable to keep down food and liquids. It's been seriously horrible. My first 2 emergency room doctors, women, were at separate emergency room locations, and both gave me hydration. One gave me Zofran and sugar, but then I had issues with the Zofran backing me up. I had another bad night of puking and panic attacks, and I called my mom in the morning crying because I was so miserable. She said she would go to a different emergency room with me, one that was a full hospital that had observation on staff. When I get there, I explain the situation to a male emergency room doctor who spoke with me for less than 5 minutes. I told him my issues with waking up with nausea, then the panic attacks, then sleeping. I told him that the panic attacks and combined with everything scare me and made me not want to be pregnant anymore. But I made it clear to him I just wanted relief and had no plan on hurting myself or anyone else. He refused to give me any medication, not even an intravenous bag to help with fluids. He sent a social worker to talk to me about the panic attacks and said she could find a facility that would take me who could help with medication and sleep, etc. I said okay, because I was so desperate at that point and had been in the emergency room for hours with no help whatsoever. He never even called obstetrics. I haven't seen mine yet at all. I haven't even had an ultrasound. I get sent to the new clinic, and by the time I get through processing, it's 3 a.m., and I'm crying because I'm having high anxiety and I haven't slept. They never gave me my nighttime medications or anything. I finally went to bed around 4 a.m., and then they woke me back up at 6 a.m. to do my vitals and said I needed to go itemize my belongings. Once I woke up, the nausea hit me immediately, and I asked for Zofran, which they refused because I had to see the internal medicine doctor first. I didn't get Zofran until 10:30 a.m., at which point I had missed breakfast and was non-stop puking. But the doctor would only allow 1 4 milligrams pill every 12 hours. I was so sick. Eventually, I'm seen by a psychiatrist who I thought would be able to help me with meds, but he said no, I can't take anything because I'm pregnant, and I'd have to talk to a different doctor who wasn't going to be in until Monday. This was on Saturday. At that point, I freak out because now I'm away from home. They aren't giving me my over-the-counter meds like Unisom and B6 for nausea or my prenatals. And they're not giving me enough Zofran to keep the nausea at bay. I said I wanted to leave then, as I was there voluntarily, and the doctor was mad and said I'd have to sign in discharge against medical advice form and he'd place me on a 24-hour hold, where the other doctor would talk to me before the 24 hours and determine if they'd try to get a court order to keep me. I was so shocked. I asked if there was any way I could talk to someone, as I didn't want to say, and they were holding me involuntarily at that point. He said no. I'm a panicky, sick mess after this, and go through all the paperwork they gave me, which included the patient bill of rights, which stated patients had the right to be discharged within 4 hours of request unless the doctor believed I was a danger to myself or others, or that I was mentally unable to make medical decisions for myself. I requested a written justification from the doctor outlining which of those reasons he was using to justify the 24-hour hold, and he refused. He just kept saying I wasn't allowed to leave until I spoke with the other doctor, who wasn't going to be in till the next day. At around 3:30, my mom and fiancé came for visitation, and I brought my paperwork with me and showed them the patient rights documents, and they were pissed, so they stayed 2.5 hours after visitation and argued with them to release me so I could go home, since they weren't even treating me anyway and withholding medications. The doctor refused to talk to my family, even though I specifically included them on my medical release forms. So they had a right to request that information and were requesting a justification for keeping me there past the 4 hours. It got so bad my mom even called the cops and filed a police report. They refused to let me go, so I had to stay another night without Zofran, and couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't keep food or water down. There was no doctor on staff at the time, so when the nurses called to get my Zofran prescription increased, the doctor didn't answer and they couldn't do anything for me. I could tell the nurses were trying their best and were very frustrated for me. The original doctor came back an hour before the 24 hours were up and clearly did not want to talk to me. I think the other doctor said he wasn't getting involved because it was turning into a legal situation at that point. He was super short with me, and when I requested justification for the 24-hour hold, he said to the emergency room doctor and said I didn't want to be pregnant anymore and used that as justification. I'm absolutely floored at this point. He didn't want to speak further about the issue and discharged me, but apparently no one knew how to discharge me because it's the weekend, so it took another few hours to even leave. The whole situation was so miserable, and I legitimately feel traumatized by the experience. I still feel like I need help with the nausea and panic attacks, but I'm scared to go back to the emergency room now. It's been so horrible, and I don't know what to do besides talk to my obstetrix at my upcoming appointment and hope she's more understanding of my problems. I'm going to file complaints with the hospital and the state regarding what happened. I am also going to consult with a few lawyers to see if I have a case against them. This whole experience has left me feeling incredibly hopeless and frustrated with the medical system. I feel like I was punished for saying I didn't want to be pregnant anymore. As for me, I am currently staying with my mom's. I was able to finally get some rest and take enough Zofran and Unisom and B6 to keep the puking at bay for a bit. I'm trying my best to keep my cool and avoid a panic attack. I appreciate any advice anyone could give on how to navigate this situation. Comments by original poster. I really wanted to move out of Texas before I got pregnant because I was so worried for those exact reasons. Doctors are too afraid to treat pregnant women here, and it's safer for them to do nothing, even if it's more detrimental to the mother and baby, than prescribe something and be held legally liable if something were to happen. It's a horrible, horrible byproduct of the current abortion ban. It's really hard to convey just how traumatizing it was with only words. I was taken away from my supportive fiancé and family to be basically held prisoner and denied medication while I couldn't stop vomiting. I was around strangers, had paper-thin scrubs, and a small blanket. The vomiting caused my throat to burn, and I pulled a muscle in my neck, so it was hard to even move my head. I just cannot overstate how much worse this situation has become, and the amount of physical and emotional damage it's caused. I genuinely felt so bad for the other patients there, who clearly needed help. The doctor was so obviously uninterested and uncaring. It's hard for me to see how anyone there is getting the appropriate care level they need, or how being there would mean anyone less self-harm. It seems like the hospital is there to fill beds and extract as much money out of insurance as possible, while running a skeleton crew of workers who provide the minimum legal requirement of care. I will say, the nurses there were great, but the facility and doctors themselves were an actual nightmare. Thank you. My mom is actually a retired police officer and works in records at a neighboring police department here, and she told them the same thing. They became very clammy, and I think realized the situation was turning into a legal one and stopped really communicating with me or my family beyond what was absolutely required. I do agree with you fully. I am going to see what my obstetrix does and says at my appointment tomorrow, then go from there. I am scared and nervous. It's hard at the moment because I also feel too weak to even advocate for myself properly. I'm too exhausted to fight at the moment, so I am hoping my support system will help me get through this and be tough for me. I will eventually come forward with my story. I really want to speak with a lawyer first and make sure all my ducks are in a row. I am also a semi-notable person in a niche field and am not public with my pregnancy and take my privacy very seriously. One of the nurses at the hospital even recognized me, which was also horrible in its own way. I'm sorry you also had to experience that. At one point, I was laying on the bathroom floor, wondering if I was going to die there. I was worried they were going to take me to court and force me to stay there longer, without treatment and without my family. I'm not sure how I will eventually recover from this, but I know I have no other option than forward, and things will eventually get better. If my fiancé and I have to empty our life savings to get me to another state for appropriate care, then we will do everything we can. That's the thing. If they had been providing me with medications and monitoring me, I would actually understand and probably wouldn't have left. But they weren't providing me with any treatment. I was having active panic attacks, and I didn't even get a "hey, try these breathing exercises." They were just holding me hostage and denying me care. That's not true. There are plenty of medications that treat anxiety that are safe during pregnancy. Having constant panic attacks and not being able to keep down food or water is not safe for pregnancy or the baby either. You have to weigh the risks of each decision you make. I also suffer from ulcerative colitis, which is triggered by stress. I am off my ulcerative colitis medication because it's not safe during pregnancy. I almost lost my colon during my last flare, which lasted a year and a half, and I was on steroids for 7 months to help control the inflammation, which would absolutely not be safe for pregnancy. These conditions can quickly become life-threatening. I didn't request an ultrasound. I simply stated that I hadn't even had one yet. The reason I wanted to work with someone in obstetrics was because it was clear the emergency room doctors were uncomfortable treating me because I was pregnant, and I thought obstetrics would be more knowledgeable in which medications are safest for pregnancy. Another reason I mentioned the ultrasound was because the reason for denying any medication was pregnancy. However, I wasn't even sure if the pregnancy was progressing correctly. It's my first pregnancy, and my mother has a history of missed miscarriages where the baby stops developing, but her body didn't start the physical process of expelling everything. Hopefully that adds more context. I am not familiar with the medical system, and this is my first pregnancy. So I don't think it's unreasonable for me to think that maybe someone with more experience treating pregnant patients in a state with very tight restrictions would be a better fit for me at that moment. I personally think this is wildly unbelievable, but it happened to me. I have no prior history for psychiatric hospitalization. I take Buspar and Zoloft. I developed a panic disorder after being on prednisone for 7 months due to my ulcerative colitis, which was well managed before pregnancy. The constant vomiting triggers my anxiety, leading to panic attacks. To be clear, I was not involuntarily held. I went voluntarily because the social worker said they'd be able to help me with medication and sleep. The psych facility knew they had no reason to keep me, therefore could not obtain a court order. If they believed I was actually a danger to myself or others, then they would have gone this route, but they didn't. My nurse there said he believed I did not belong there. He even told my family that, and fought to get me released. I understand you're making a judgment based on your experience and knowledge, but I hope you could put yourself in my shoes, as someone with very limited knowledge of the medical system and going through my first pregnancy. Our thought processes and reasoning are probably going to be vastly different. I did what I thought was the best thing to do in my situation, and it turned into a nightmare. I'm sorry if my story isn't believable to you, but I'm still going to do what I can to make sure this type of thing doesn't happen again in the future. And to be clear, the reason I went to different emergency rooms was because the first one was a standalone private emergency room, like a care point or something. And the emergency room doctor recommended going to one with a hospital with obstetrics attached next time. So the next time I went to a Baylor emergency room hospital, which I mistakenly thought was a full hospital, but it was some type of hybrid situation. I am not originally from Texas, so I'm not familiar with the hospitals around here. The next one I went to was an emergency room at a full hospital. To add more context, they had asked me if I had a history of panic attacks, and I explained that I did. I had developed a panic disorder after being on prednisone for 7 months due to my ulcerative colitis. They asked what I would do in those situations to avoid triggers, etc. Before, my panic attacks were focused mainly on social situations or being too far from a bathroom, etc. So to avoid triggers, I'd do things like change my diet or avoid situations where there was no bathroom. But now, my trigger was the pregnancy symptoms, which I can't avoid because I can't not be pregnant anymore. I said the panic attacks and nausea made me not want to be pregnant, which I believe was misconstrued. But I think there's some pretty crazy implications of saying any pregnant woman who says they don't want to be pregnant anymore can be held involuntarily at a psychiatric hospital. Honestly, I would have been more than happy to stay there, but because I wasn't really being given any further treatment, I just wanted to go home to my family and support system. If I was going to be vomiting, I'd prefer to do it in my own toilet. I was also worried about missing my obstetrics appointment if they decided to hold me longer. The original emergency room doctor did not have enough to send me there involuntarily, and the psych at the facility openly admitted he believed the emergency room doctor misled me and was the one to tell me to fill out the discharge against medical advice, but placed me on a 24-hour hold because it was their policy, which I had pointed out contradicted Texas state law for patients who were there voluntarily. This facility has been open for only 10 months or so, and one nurse said it's very rare that someone would come there voluntarily, but then request to leave so quickly. But I think a lot of those voluntary patients have been through that system before, so know what to expect, versus I had no clue. When I pointed out the 4-hour release requirement in the documents they gave me, they didn't even know that it was in there. They said all patients get a 24-hour hold and they've never released someone within 4 hours. I meet with my obstetrics tomorrow, so hopefully I'll get some better support there. Thanks for listening. It's so scary. One girl at the facility I spoke to had been there 3 times for self-harm thoughts. She said she believed the facility wasn't supportive for patients who have disabilities or are pregnant. She said one time her roommate had dementia and was clearly not taking care of her hygiene or self at all, and the girl tried to advocate for the woman, but the woman received no help. The facility is new, open for only about 10 months, and I think they're trying to accept anyone to fill beds even if they aren't properly equipped to care for them. I think a lot of these people don't have the wherewithal or the family support to advocate for them either, so nothing ever gets done and no one is held accountable. It's a nightmare situation and has been incredibly eye-opening. The social worker said that they were originally going to try to get me into one of the private rooms that they had at the hospital, but came back later and said the psychiatrist, I assume, denied me. So she said she was going to call some other places and see if she could get me into one of them. Maybe 2 hours later, she came back and said she found a place who would accept me. This new place was indeed a locked facility. They have only been open for 10 months and seem to be accepting everyone. There were 2 other individuals who were admitted at the same time from the same hospital. One, I believe, was there for alcohol withdrawal, and the other expressed thoughts of self-harm. The first emergency room doctor just seemed really busy and didn't want to deal with me. Then, the psych at the facility was just the on-call doctor and clearly didn't want to be there and kept saying he couldn't release me until I spoke with the attending who wasn't there because it was the weekend. I don't think they've ever had anyone challenge them on the 4-hour rule, as the place has only been open for 10 months. I was in a locked psychiatric hospital. No, you cannot just get up and walk out. Update 2 days later. First, I'd like to say thank you to the outpouring of support. It really means a lot to me. I'm going to start with a very small update, and then at the end I'm going to answer some questions, clear up some misconceptions about what happened. Update. I did see my new obstetrician gynecologist and had my first ultrasound. My little guy is measuring right on time and had a heartbeat of 167. I feel overwhelmed with relief, knowing he is safe there and doing well. I explained the whole situation to my obstetrix, and she was incredibly understanding. She gave me a new prescription of Zofran and took some labs while I was there to check my electrolytes and probably some other things. I'll have another follow-up with her soon. At this point, I feel comfortable enough working with her, so that's my current plan. As for complaints and legal stuff, There isn't much movement on that front due to the holiday, but I still have every intention to pursue those options and will try to update as much as I can. Now the other stuff. I did not expect that post to gain as much attention as it did. It was cross-posted many times, and the responses were overwhelmingly sympathetic, but there was a ton of skepticism, especially from doctors who read it. But hey, it's the internet, so that's to be expected, I guess. At the end of the day, I don't need any strangers online to believe what happened to me, because I have recourse in real life, and that's ultimately what matters. I was accused of changing my story, but I think that was mainly from people who skimmed my post, so below I'm going to clear up some things and provide some additional details, not because I have to, but because I think if there's going to be discourse about my experience, I want it to start from a place of accuracy of timeline and events. Starting with, at no point was the court involved with the decision-making process. I went to the emergency room willingly. They made it seem like they were not equipped to help my situation, and that the other facility would be able to help me with my sleeping and panic attacks. I was so run down by the time the social worker came to my room that I'd have agreed to go anywhere they said would provide me with relief. I went to the new facility voluntarily of my own free will. There was no 72-hour hold. When I mentioned 72 hours in my last post, I meant that the whole situation from going to the emergency room to leaving the new facility took place over 72 hours. Once I got to the new facility and met with the doctors, I realized that I was not in the right place to get the care I personally needed. I was away from my support system, not being given the proper medication to control my vomiting. My anxiety was significantly heightened, and I was not being given any additional treatment or resources. So to me, there was no point in me being at the facility, and it was indeed making my situation undoubtedly worse. After speaking with the on-call psychiatrist, he told me that he thought the emergency room doctor misled me and that I'd need to sign and discharge against medical advice form, which would place me on a 24-hour hold. It was clear he did not want to be the one to discharge me and insisted I needed to speak with the attending. He mentioned the possibility of a court order, but said it was unlikely they'd get one for my case. After that conversation, I went to review the paperwork they gave me during admission. I found the Patient Bill of Rights, which stated that for voluntary patients, they had a right to be released within 4 hours of their request. Unless 1, I changed my mind and wanted to stay. 2, I was under the age of 16 and my guardian didn't want to release me. Or 3, if the doctor has reason to believe that I might meet the criteria for court-ordered services or emergency detention, because 1, I'm likely to cause serious harm to myself, 2, I'm likely to cause serious harm to others, or 3, my condition will continue to deteriorate and I am unable to make informed decisions as to whether or not to stay for treatment. After I read that, I brought the papers to the nurses and requested a justification from the psychiatrist for the 24-hour hold. I wanted to know which reasons he was using. The psychiatrist did not provide reason or justification beyond the attending needed to evaluate me. That's it. To be clear, this is illegal. They had zero reason to keep me past the 4 hours. At no time had I indicated I was a threat to myself or others. Not verbally or written on any of the questionnaires that I had filled out during admissions. The attending not working that day is not a legal justification to hold me. Their schedule does not supersede my rights as a patient. Now, after the 24 hours was up, the original on-call doctor came back to discharge me. He was clearly agitated that the attending refused to come in to do the discharge, so I never at any point spoke with the attending who was originally assigned to me. The on-call doctor did not seek a court order to detain me. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes or less. When I asked again for the justification to keep me, he asked me if I said anything to the emergency room doctor about wanting to end my pregnancy, and I told him I just said I didn't want to be pregnant because I was so miserable. I then tried to ask if he believed that was enough justification for the hold, but he cut me off. It was clear he didn't want to engage in any further conversation. My concern here was the implications of legally being allowed to involuntarily commit any woman who said she didn't want to be pregnant anymore, which seems insane to me. But I digress. To answer questions about the facility, why didn't I just leave? Because this was a locked facility. I couldn't just get up and walk out of the door. How were they able to take me so fast? This facility has been open only for 10 months. They had beds and empty rooms available when I was there. Questions about my emergency room visits. I had 3 separate visits which took place over 4 weeks. The first emergency room I went to was a standalone clinic, not associated with a larger hospital. The doctor there said next time to go to an emergency room attached to a hospital with learning and development. So the next time I went to an emergency room, I went to an emergency room hospital that I mistakenly thought was a full hospital, but it was a hybrid, and they did not have learning and development. The third emergency room was attached to a full hospital. I was not doctor shopping. I'm just not familiar with the hospital systems here. Regarding my comments about ultrasounds and obstetrics, I never requested an ultrasound during any of my visits to the emergency room. I mentioned the ultrasound in the original post just to state I hadn't had one yet and hadn't been evaluated by an obstetrix yet. My mother has a history of missed miscarriages, so in my head I thought it could be a possibility, and if I was being denied medication for being pregnant, I was just hoping I did have a viable pregnancy. But again, I didn't request an ultrasound. Concerns regarding self-managed abortion. I am not and have never considered a DIY abortion. I am lucky enough to have all the resources I would need to fly anywhere in the world to get appropriate medical care if I had decided to go that route. Both my fiancé and I work high-paying remote tech jobs, and in the worst case, we could move out of state tomorrow if I absolutely needed to. Obviously, this isn't an ideal route, but it is an option that is still on the table, even if it's just to get care in a better medical system outside the state of Texas. Medications I'm currently taking: 10 mg bisoprolol 2x a day, 50 mg Zoloft, Zofran, Unisum and B6, prenatals, no benzos. So to cut through all the crap, whether you agree or not with the doctor's course of actions, I hope most people can see that the facility was not the right place for me to be. They were not well equipped to handle my pregnancy symptoms, they were clearly understaffed, and they were not providing me with any additional treatment that I wasn't getting at home. There was no reason for me to be there. It made things in my case significantly worse, and I hope, maybe if anything, people can just learn from my experience. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for their support and for the direct messages I received. I'm also so sorry for all the other similar stories I've read. It seems like there's a bigger issue happening here, and I hope others can eventually find peace too. I am going to continue to work diligently with my obstetrics, psychiatrist, and hopefully a therapist, so I can really unpack this entire situation. As I said before, I'll try to update as much as I can, but I'm sure the complaint and legal process will be slow-moving. I'd also like to ask if you know any attorneys in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who may be interested in this case. Please feel free to shoot me a private direct message with their information so I can follow up. I will also try to answer any additional questions in the comments in case there's anything else I'm forgetting. Obligatory, sorry for the terrible formatting. I'm on mobile.